This quote, it just nails the idea we're talking about. It's the core thesis. You take Judeo-Christian heritage, you add a heavy dose of Greek reason, and boom, you get modern science and democracy. This is the argument we're going to explore from all sides.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the whole Athens and Jerusalem idea. Then, we'll see how critics push back on the very definition of the West. After that, we'll dive into some specific historical claims that are up for debate and touch on the modern politics behind the story. And finally, we'll wrap up with why these stories about the past matter so much.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, with the main argument itself. What exactly are these two big pillars that are supposedly holding up all of Western civilization?
Well, according to this story, it all boils down to this incredible fusion. On one hand, you've got Athens. Think logic, philosophy, scientific thinking, that whole Greek legacy. And on the other hand, you've got Jerusalem, which stands for moral purpose, a sense of higher truth, basically the whole Judeo-Christian tradition. The argument is that it's the unique combination of these two that gave the West its edge. But here's where we get to the first big critique from our sources. It kicks off with a really simple but kind of devastating question. When we say the West, what and who are we actually talking about?
At the heart of this whole thing is the phrase Judeo-Christian values. It's a neat little package for all the moral ideas coming from Jerusalem. But as we're about to see, critics point out that this package can be super selective about what gets included and what gets conveniently left on the cutting room floor. And this is what critics say gets completely erased from the picture. Take the massive influence of the Islamic world. I mean, the very Greek reason we're talking about, a huge chunk of it was saved and built upon through Arabic translations. It's a historical debt that's often just ignored in this narrative. And then there's the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, which kept Greco-Roman culture alive for 1,000 years. What about North Africa, a critical piece of the Roman Empire, or Eastern Europe? Critics say it's like they're honorary members of the West only when it suits the argument. This quote from Reddit, blunt as it is, really captures the core of that frustration. The point critics are making is that Western civilization often feels less like a real historical place and more like a flexible label that you can stick on different places at different times, all to make a particular point. Okay, so the definition of the West is a bit shaky. But what about the specific historical claims that the Athens and Jerusalem story is built on? Let's zoom in on that. And this is just a perfect example of the disconnect. On the left, you have the claim that the whole idea of an ordered, predictable universe comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition. But on the right, you have the historical pushback. The pagan Athenians were obsessed with an ordered universe. That was the whole point of their philosophy and science. Critics argue the influence actually went the other way around. And when you look at a different version of the timeline, the simple story starts to fall apart. Critics argue that battles like Tours get blown way out of proportion to create this clean West versus Islam story, while completely ignoring things like the Islamic Golden Age that followed. The Crusades also make any simple narrative of a clash of civilizations, well, really complicated. And the fall of Constantinople in 1453? That wasn't just an end. It was also a new beginning, as Greek scholars fled west and helped spark the Renaissance. So, if the definition is a bit messy and the historical claims are contested, it leads to the third big critique from the sources, that this whole way of telling history isn't really about the past at all. It's about serving a purpose, right here in the present. And that's the real heart of it. From this critical viewpoint, the Athens and Jerusalem story isn't so much an objective history lesson as it is a carefully constructed foundation for a modern political and cultural worldview. So what's the supposed goal? Well, critics argue it's to create this perfect, almost saintly origin story for the United States, making it seem like the ultimate achievement of Western civilization. It also lets you frame any modern social movements you don't like as some kind of dangerous slide back into paganism that could bring everything crashing down. Essentially, the critique is that this history is really a heroic backstory for a very specific political agenda today. Now, the Current Affairs article makes a particularly pointed critique. It looks at attacks on a group of thinkers called the Frankfurt School, many of whom were Jewish intellectuals who fled Nazi Germany. The article argues that blaming this group for all of society's modern problems is just a new version of a much older and deeply anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about foreign intellectuals poisoning the country with dangerous ideas. Okay, so we've looked at the big thesis, and we've gone through the major critiques from our sources. What does it all add up to? I mean, why does a debate about ancient history get people so fired up? It's because this is never just about who did what when. It's a fight over our identity. The stories we tell about where we come from, they define who we believe we are today, what we think is important, and where we're supposed to be headed. And what we choose to leave out of that story is just as telling as what we put in. And that really leaves us with this final question to think about. The story we choose to tell about our past, whether it's for a country or a culture, it isn't just looking in the rearview mirror. It's drawing the map for the road ahead. So the real question for all of us is, how is the history we decide to tell today building the world we're all going to live in tomorrow?